What's up you guys, Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB and welcome to the Awesome MTB Trail Bike Buyer's Guide. What's up you guys, Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB and welcome back to the Awesome MTB Trail Bike Buyer's Guide. Over the last few months, we've been testing out 11 of the best trail bikes on the market. Now these are gonna be 29ers with 140 to 150 millimeters of travel. And even though there's 11 bikes in this test, each one has a very unique personality. It's gonna be meant for a different rider. So in this series, we're gonna be breaking down each one of these bikes to help you guys out with the purchase of your next bike. Now in this video, we're gonna be reviewing the Pivot Switchblade. Now this bike holds a special place in my heart because I was actually able to own one of the Talons when it was first released. Love that bike and I'm so stoked to have spent more time on this chassis and compare it to other bikes in this test. Now, before we get into this video, I do want to give a huge thank you to Jenson USA for sponsoring this video. If you didn't know, Jenson USA is one of the largest online bike shops out there and they are awesome. They have so many bikes and parts in stock ready to ship to you with same-day shipping. Their prices are incredible and their customer service is second to none. They are rider-owned and have been around for 30 years, so they know how important it is to not only get the best deals, but also keep the time off the bike to a minimum. So like I said, they offer same-day shipping and their customer service is backed by gear advisors to help make picking the right item or bike out very simple. And like I said, their prices are incredible, some of the best deals in the industry, and I personally love playing around with their online bike builder because like I said, they have so many rad brands to choose from. The customization options are endless and we can't recommend Jenson USA enough. Once again, you guys, the customer service at Jenson USA is amazing and we'll put a link to all of their information in the description of this video. Huge thank you to them for sponsoring this video. All right, so a little bit about the bike. The Pivot Switchblade is a bike with 142 millimeters of rear travel, 160 millimeters of travel up front, and it features Pivot's tried and true DW-Link suspension design. Now this bike right here is their XT XTR build and it actually came with their carbon wheels, DT Swiss 1501. Now I'm currently riding a size extra large frame. I'm 6'2" for reference with an 805 saddle height and this thing fits me like a glove. Up front we have a Fox 36 with a brand new Grip X2 dampener and in the rear we have a Fox Float X-Rear shock. For the drivetrain we have a Shimano 1x12 system and it's going to be a blend of XT XTR. We have a Fox transfer dropper post with a WTB Pivot branded saddle. Up front in the cockpit we have Pivot's own carbon handlebars as well as their own branded grips. For stopping power we have tried and true Shimano XT brakes. For wheels we have a carbon wheel set, so these are going to be DT Swiss 1501 wheels with 240 hubs, and for tires we have a Minion DHF up front and a classic Minion DHR2 in the rear. And of course we have our Crank Brothers Stamp 7 pedals in a size large. Now this is a very light build overall, coming in at about 32.5 pounds with pedals. And if anyone has been following me, number one, you know that I love DW-Link suspension. And then number two, you know that I actually love Pivot bikes. Now before we get into those reasons why I love this bike, also some things that I don't necessarily love about it and what my thoughts are about the actual build. Let's take this thing on the trail so you guys can see how this thing rides. All right, you guys, this is the GoPro portion of this test that I have been most excited to film. The Pivot Switchblade is what we're reviewing today. And honestly, you guys, I've tested so many bikes over the years and I have favorites, all-time favorites. This is high on that list. Key portion of this test, the Switchblade is probably one of the most playful bikes I've ridden at all time that still retains so much of that aggression that I'm looking for on trails when they get rowdy. And every single time I ride this bike, I get a huge smile on my face. He has bits, and you know Pivot, they know how to do chunk. If you look at their backyard out in South Mountain, I mean, this is just another day in the park for them. So much control through chunky tech. And I truly think this might also be one of the most precise bikes in the test. It just has this freaking crazy ability to be put exactly where you want it, and then also just let off the front brake, lift the front, and just get over anything with that short rear end. And another thing that I and the Switchblade love to do is climb. And climbing, it's one of those things where One part of the test for most bikes is how motivated am I to get out there and get after it. Every time I get on the Pivot, my rides end up being a little longer than I intended them to, because it's such a good climber. A little bit of technical action right here. No issues at all for the Switchblade. Like I said, precision is a word I'm gonna use a lot when talking about the Switchblade. So nimble, both up and down. One of those bikes that just makes you want to pedal. It's just so efficient. And it's interesting though, because normally bikes that are that good at pedaling, when it comes time for traction to kick in, will feel a little harsher. This is the opposite. That DWing feels so smooth and buttery. Now we got some high-speed stability through this rock art. I will say, in terms of high-speed stability, that might not necessarily be this bike's forte. It's still great and handles its own. There are other bikes in this test that might have slightly longer wheelbases that I think have a little bit more so high-speed stability, but as you guys can tell through the chunk, it's still so composed. And I feel like, I mean, you look at their backyard, South Mountain, there's so many chunky rock moves that bikes have to be able to handle gnarly lines. And this bike does so, just maybe not at the speeds necessarily as say something like that Transition Sentinel, or maybe something like the Stumpy. But you know what? For my personal riding style, sometimes that's what I'm looking for. I would say a majority of times, I like to play around with lines. I might not necessarily want to go out there and just go full tilt. This bike still will be able to handle those speeds, but sections like this where it's much more nimble is where the bike feels very alive. Now we also have big corners like this that are super swoopy, so much fun to play around with. And coming out of the corners where you really notice that DWing kicking in, like this section, I'm not even gonna touch the pedals. I'm just gonna pump off the trail. So much speed generated. DWing, man, if I was to ever meet Dave Weagle in person, I might just fanboy the entire time because I love DWing. Made it to the most technical part of the test. Like I said, you guys, I feel like another big part of this bike is that rear end being so short. It's so freaking fun, but at the same time, you get so much composure from the front end. And sections like this, you can really pick exactly where you want the Switchblade to go. A little bit of slickness here. And honestly, you guys, I feel like if you were to tell me, Mo, I need you to come up with the perfect mountain bike, your perfect mountain bike, this would be high on the list. We're actually gonna go high line here, make it a little spicier in the tech. I just feel like the control that the Switchblade gives you is pretty insane through the chunk. And it's just one of those bikes that inspires you to just ride more. And I feel like that's so important from a bike, especially if it's gonna be your personal one. You want to be motivated to ride your bike. And I feel like the Switchblade, every single time I get on it, like I said, my rides end up being longer than intended. And it just really puts a smile on my face every single time. Now, with that being said, let's get back and talk about it. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed that ride on the Pivot Switchblade. Now, let's talk about some things that I love about this bike and some stuff that I don't necessarily love. First thing that I absolutely love about the Pivot Switchblade is how precise and nimble it is. It definitely is one of the most precise, playful bikes out of this test, and I feel like that was a goal of Pivot all along with the Switchblade. I feel like they were really trying to maximize playfulness out on the trails. They know there's plenty of enduro bikes out there, and if you want something a little bit more beefy, yes, they have the Firebird in their lineup. I feel like with the Switchblade, they wanted you to be able to tackle challenging terrain, but still have a blast while doing so. The Switchblade really does sum up what I feel like makes a trail bike so great. It needs to be playful, it needs to inspire you to kind of play around out on the trails. And yeah, overall, I was continuously blown away by how playful this bike is out on the trails. Now, there's gonna be two factors there. Number one, they didn't go too slack on the head angle, so while it's still fairly slack in the low mode at 65.2, it's not to the point where it feels like the front end feels dead. And then if you combine that with that super short rear end that Pivot is known for, once again, you guys, in and out of corners, this thing is a blast. Now, another thing that I love about this bike is the precision, and I feel like a lot's gonna come from that frame stiffness. This is definitely one of the stiffer frames out of the test, as well as, once again, that front end not being too slack. I've said it before and I'll say it again, it really does feel like you can put the Pivot Switchblade exactly where you want to out on the trails, and it feels almost like a surgical knife when you're out there riding. Another thing that I absolutely love about this bike is the suspension design. Once again, you guys know that I love DW Link. It has a very supple initial stroke, but at the same time too, when you get out of the saddle and you really put the pedals down, it tightens up in the anti-squat and you get a very efficient pedaling platform out of the saddle. But at the same time, when you want traction like on the downhills, the bike tracks to the ground super well, and it still has that playful pop in and out of corners. Another thing that I love about the Pivot Switchblade is it actually feels like a trail bike. I feel like a lot of bikes in that 140 to 150 millimeter category, you can go one of two ways. You can either keep it playful or you can keep it insanely stable and a little bit more borderline on the enduro side. I feel like this is a balance of both, but at the end of the day, it still inspires you to go out there and have a great time on your bike on trail rides. I feel like I could take this bike on a wide variety of rides. I can go on an XC ride, I can go on a full downhill ride. I'm not gonna be like, oh man, I brought the wrong bike for today. Sure, there's gonna be a few times, maybe like Whistler Bike Park, if you're running bike park laps, that you might feel a little bit undergunned on the Pivot Switchblade, but I feel like for a majority of my rides and having a one bike to do everything, I would absolutely love to have the Pivot Switchblade in my quiver. Now for some things I don't necessarily love about the Switchblade, it's not the most aggressive bike out of the test. Once again, you guys, if you are looking for a more on the enduro all mountain side of the spectrum where you just kind of want as much high speed stability, I don't necessarily think you're gonna get that with the Switchblade. The Switchblade is very capable on the downhills, but at the end of the day, I think where this bike truly shines is being a very nimble and playful trail bike. Like I said, this is supposed to be a more playful enduro bike. Another thing that I don't necessarily love about the Pivot Switchblade is that it doesn't feel necessarily as bottomless as some other bikes in this test. The bike does have 142 millimeters of rear travel, and once again, this bike is plenty capable on technical downhills as well as a majority of downhills out there, but at the end of the day, there are other bikes in this test that have a little bit more of a bottomless feeling that we'll talk about in the conclusion video of this series. In terms of the actual build, I love the Fox 36 Grip X2 as well as the Fox Float X rear shock. The drivetrain was okay. I still don't think I'm partial to Shimano drivetrains. I just feel like they feel a little clunkier than SRAM and they're a little on the louder side. I love the XT brakes, solid stopping power there. In terms of the handlebars and the grips, I actually think that Pivot has some of the best stock components that they make themselves. Once again, these are Pivot handlebars and Pivot grips. The grips are insane. Even if you don't have a Pivot, I feel like you should give these grips a try. I'm not necessarily a biggest fan of that Fox drop because I just feel like it feels a little bit on the stickier side. I absolutely love this wheel set. Even though it's not going to be the loudest wheel set out there, I feel like it's so light and precise and it has a very good carbon construction. So yeah, really big fan of the DT Swiss 1501s. Once again, you guys, we'll put this build in the description of this video as well as how I would personally build up my Pivot Switchblade. Actually, the Pivot Switchblade is probably one of the bikes in this test that I would be stoked to build up as my own. I really did love my time on the Switchblade. I feel like it's a bike for someone out there that wants to ride a wide variety of trails and they want a true trail bike. They want something that's going to pedal well both in and out of the saddle. They want something they're going to be able to play around with out on the trails. Maybe they're not necessarily looking for the most downhill stable trail bike. They just want something that's going to inspire them to get out there, play around on the trails, but at the same time have the confidence knowing that they can tackle a wide variety of technical trails. And yeah, overall, I feel like this is the epitome of what a true trail bike is. Now, I do also think that this bike might not necessarily be for all riders out there. Like I said, if you're looking for high speed stability, I do feel like that there's other bikes in these tests that might be more up your alley. And also, not everyone's going to be looking for a bike that's going to be as playful as this. Me personally, I love climbing. I love putting time in the saddle, but at the same time too, I love technical downhills. And I feel like this is a bike that does a wide variety of things really well. Super stoked on how playful it is. And once again, you guys, the out of the saddle sprints on this bike, it just inspires you to go for longer rides. I feel like every time I get on this bike is an adventure, and can also rest assured knowing that I have the bike that's going to be able to tackle technical downhills. Overall, very impressed with the Pivot Switchblade. How did this bike compare to other bikes in this test? You guys will have to stay tuned for the conclusion of this video series. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, not miss out any of those videos, and let me know in the comment section if we didn't touch on any of your questions about the Pivot Switchblade. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the review. Until next time, you guys, ride awesome. You.